The sleek, silver hulls of Earth's exploratory fleet glided silently through the void, their engines purring softly, as if unaware of the storm that was about to hit. A flotilla of human ships, scientific vessels, diplomats, and military escorts had ventured far beyond the safety of Earth's borders. Their mission was simple: explore, learn, and expand humanity's reach in the stars. But they were heading straight into a hornet's nest, and the hornets had already noticed them. The Xolarn, a cold and calculating species with technology that surpassed even the wildest dreams of humanity, had warned them. A single message, received through encrypted channels, came through the fleet's communication systems just a few days before their arrival in the unknown region of space: leave or perish. The message was clear, short, and undeniably menacing. The human fleet's commanders, however, had grown accustomed to the idea that they were the vanguard of Earth's ambitions. They viewed the Xolarn as another in a long line of alien species they could negotiate with, outsmart, or conquer. In the past, many species in the galaxy had threatened humanity, only to be defeated or swayed by sheer determination, diplomacy, or technological innovation. The Council, with their eyes set on the immense resources of the uncharted galaxy, brushed the Xolarn warning aside. After all, Earth was not the same place it had been a few centuries ago. With weapons far superior to anything the Xolarn could possess, and the vast ingenuity of humanity on their side, the fleet's leadership believed that Xolarn were merely posturing. A grave mistake. Admiral Laura Jensen, commander of the flagship Excalibur, had a sinking feeling the moment the transmission came through. As the message echoed through the ship's control room, Jensen, usually unshakable, couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She had seen threats before: terrorist organizations, hostile governments, even the occasional pirate faction. But the tone of the Xolarn message was different. It carried weight, a certainty, as if the Xolarn already knew what humans were capable of, and they simply didn't care. "Admiral, we should consider the possibility of retreat," said Commander Matthew Drake, her right-hand officer, his voice tight with concern. "Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered before. Their ships, they could wipe us out with ease." Jensen stood by the massive viewport of the Excalibur, gazing out into the void. The stars were beautiful, but their serenity felt deceptive, like a calm before the storm. "We can't back down, Commander," she replied, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "We've come too far. We need to make contact. Show them we're here for peaceful exploration." Drake didn't respond immediately, but his worried gaze followed Jensen as she turned to face him. She had always been a woman of resolve, and yet the weight of this moment seemed to press on her in ways she couldn't explain. Still, the Council had made its decision, and as fleet commander, it was her duty to follow orders, even if every instinct screamed at her to retreat. "All ships remain on course," she ordered, her voice unwavering, masking the doubt that was growing within her. "We'll make first contact and show them we're here to stay." But deep down, Jensen couldn't escape the sinking feeling that the universe was about to prove just how small humanity really was in the face of a force they had no understanding of. The Xolarn had given their warning. They had chosen not to listen, and now they were marching toward a conflict none of them could hope to win. The moment the Xolarn fleet appeared on the edge of the human flotilla's sensor range, everything shifted. What had been a calm exploration mission turned into something else entirely, something much darker. The flagship Excalibur and the other ships in the fleet began to receive strange, distorted signals from the Xolarn ships. Static and crackling interference filled the communication channels, an eerie prelude to the storm that was about to break. Admiral Jensen's hands hovered over the controls as she watched the readings on her console. Her eyes narrowed. The Xolarn fleet, unlike anything Earth had ever seen, was massive, far larger than any projection had suggested. Dozens of warships, each one easily 3 times the size of Excalibur, lined up in formation, their sleek, angular hulls glinting with deadly purpose. The very presence of the fleet sent a wave of dread through the crew. The message that had been received moments ago suddenly felt like a ticking clock, one that was about to strike midnight. "Admiral, they're powering up their weapons," Commander Drake said, his voice tight with tension. "They're locking onto our ships. We can't fight them off." Jensen muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We weren't ready for this. I should have listened." But it was too late for second-guessing. Earth had pushed too far into the unknown, and now the consequences were unfolding before them. "Admiral," a voice crackled over the comms, interrupting her thoughts. "We've received a transmission. It's—" The technician paused, his voice shaking. "It's a threat. We're being targeted." Before Jensen could respond, the void around them exploded in blinding light. The first shot hit the Excalibur's shields, sending a violent shudder through the entire ship. The impact was so powerful that even the hull of the massive vessel groaned, struggling to hold together. The crew stumbled as the gravity dampeners fought against the shockwave. Alarms blared, flashing red across every console. The Excalibur's shields flared brightly before collapsing under the sheer force of the attack. "Damage report," Jensen barked, gripping the edge of the table, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Shields at 30%. Power to the weapon systems is failing," came the reply from her chief engineer. "We're taking damage to the port side. Main engines are offline." "Get the shields back up," Jensen ordered, but she knew they were running out of time. On the bridge, panic set in. The Solarn, with their superior technology, were relentless, firing beams of concentrated plasma at the human fleet with terrifying precision. Within minutes, multiple human ships were already slipping into the void of space, their hulls torn open, consumed by fire and debris. The Excalibur's shields barely held against the second and third blasts, but it was clear that the human fleet had no chance of winning in a direct confrontation. "Admiral, the other ships are scattering. They're retreating," Commander Drake shouted. "We have to fall back. Now." Jensen stared at the view screen as the remnants of the human fleet, once a symbol of Earth's strength and ambition, began to break apart. Some ships turned tail, fleeing into deep space. Others attempted to fight back, firing whatever weapons they had left, but it was futile. The Solarn didn't just overpower them, they made an example of them. Another beam slammed into the Excalibur, and this time, it was too much. The bridge lights flickered, throwing everything into darkness for a heartbeat. When they returned, the once pristine control panels were covered in sparks and smoke. The hull groaned again, and a small fire broke out near the aft section of the ship. Jensen's hand shook as she tried to stabilize the ship. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she shouted, but the words felt hollow. The Excalibur barely managed to pull away from the next blast, its engines struggling against the brutal assault. But Jensen knew they couldn't outrun the Solarn. Their technology was far superior, and their relentless pursuit would ensure that no ship would escape. "Admiral," Drake said, his voice nearly breaking, "it's over. We need to retreat. We won't survive another hit." Jensen stood at the helm, watching helplessly as the alien fleet methodically destroyed humanity's forces. Her mind raced, and for the first time in her life, she was not certain of what to do next. Initiate a full retreat. All ships, fall back to Earth. Her voice rang with authority, but there was no victory in it. No triumph. Just the bitter taste of defeat as the remnants of humanity's fleet turned tail and fled, leaving the stars behind in a race for survival. But one thing was certain, that Solarn had made their message clear, and humanity had just learned the price of their arrogance. The battered remnants of the human fleet limped toward Earth, each ship a scared shadow of its former self. The Excalibur was no exception. Its once pristine hull was marred by plasma burns and gashes from the violent barrage of Solarn weaponry. The emergency lights flickered on the ship, casting an eerie red glow over the crew members as they navigated back home. The morale was shattered, and silence hung heavy in the control room. Admiral Jensen stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the shattered view screen. The cold expanse of space felt far too quiet, too still, in contrast to the chaos they had just endured. The voices of her officers filled the room with fragmented reports, each one a reminder of their devastating losses. "Admiral," Commander Drake's voice broke through her thoughts. "The fleet's barely intact. We've lost half of our ships. The survivors are damaged and scattered. If we don't get them patched up, we won't make it back to Earth in time." Jensen nodded, her jaw clenched in frustration. She knew the scale of their defeat. The Sol-Arn had torn through them with brutal efficiency, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. But amidst the crushing weight of failure, one thought began to form in the back of her mind. This wasn't the end. "We need to survive. We need to rebuild," she said, her voice low but steady. "And we need to fight back." Drake looked at her, his brow furrowing. "Fight back? With what?" "The Sol-Arn are too strong. Their technology." "I don't care about their technology. We have something they don't," Jensen interrupted, her eyes hardening with a renewed sense of purpose. "We have something far more dangerous than their weapons. We have humanity's ingenuity, its will to survive. And I'll be damned if we let them destroy us without a fight." The words struck a chord in the room, a spark of something that had been missing since the fleet's disastrous encounter with the Sol-Arn. It was the same spark that had driven humans to the stars in the first place. Their resilience, their ability to adapt and overcome. "Gather all remaining personnel," Jensen ordered, her voice gaining strength. "We need to put every scientist, engineer, and strategist to work. If we can't outgun them, we'll outsmart them." Back on Earth, the mood was no less grim. The government had declared martial law, and military leaders scrambled to assess the damage. Panic spread across the globe, and for a time, humanity seemed paralyzed by the enormity of the threat that loomed over them. Cities were put on high alert, with the remnants of Earth's fleet providing the only defense against the encroaching alien menace. But as Earth's leaders struggled to respond, there was a shift in the people. Across every continent, from the dust of ruined cities to the quiet corners of research labs, humanity began to rally. Engineers who had once worked on civilian projects turned their attention to developing new weapons and technologies. Scientists, fueled by a deep-seated belief in humanity's potential, gathered in secret to study every scrap of the Sol-Arn's technology that had been recovered from the wreckage. Admiral Jensen's message rang out loud and clear, resonating with everyone who had ever felt the sting of defeat and the spark of resistance. They were not finished. Weeks passed, and Earth began to transform. The ingenuity that humans were known for began to shine through in ways that no one had expected. From the ashes of their failure, a new fleet began to take shape, smaller, sleeker ships designed to outmaneuver the overwhelming might of the Sol-Arn. Each new design incorporated technologies adapted from both their own research and the debris left in the wake of the Sol-Arn assault. In secret labs across the globe, scientists worked tirelessly, piecing together new weapons that could pierce the Sol-Arn's formidable shields, while military commanders devised guerrilla tactics meant to outwit the superior alien forces. Earth's response was becoming more than just a defensive maneuver. It was a rallying cry, a statement that humanity wouldn't bow down so easily. Jensen, now more determined than ever, oversaw the rebuilding efforts from the command center on Excalibur, where her crew had worked relentlessly to repair and retrofit the flagship. Her once unshakable confidence had been tempered by the brutal reality of their defeat, but it had also been solidified into a quiet, relentless resolve. She had seen the worst that the universe could throw at them, and still, humanity would stand. "We may have lost the first battle," she said to Drake during a quiet moment on the bridge, "but we're far from finished. It's time to make the Sol-Arn regret underestimating us." And with that, the first glimmers of humanity's resurgence began to form, stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than before. The fire of resistance had been lit, and it burned brighter with every passing day. The Sol-Arn, it seemed, had underestimated humanity's resolve. In the wake of their overwhelming victory, their commanders allowed themselves a moment of arrogance. They believed that the humans, broken and scattered, would cower in fear or surrender outright. The Xolarn had never encountered a species so resilient, so capable of rising from the ashes of defeat, and their hubris was about to cost them dearly. Back on Earth, Admiral Jensen and her team had been working around the clock to develop a new strategy. With Earth's fleet restored, albeit smaller, they were ready for the next phase of their fight. The new ships were sleek, fast, and armed with a mix of improvised weaponry and alien technology scavenged from the wreckage. But it wasn't just the ships themselves that had changed. The humans had learned valuable lessons from their disastrous first encounter with the Xolarn. Jensen stood at the command center, staring at the holographic map of the solar system. The Xolarn armada was still lurking on the fringes of human space, too arrogant to strike again immediately. They had decided to let their victory settle in, convinced that their power had shattered humanity's will to fight. "They're taking their time," Drake remarked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's almost like they're waiting for us to regroup, to strike when we're weakest." Jensen's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. They think they've won, and they're letting their guard down." But the humans were far from defeated. The time they'd spent in retreat had been used wisely. Scientists had perfected an experimental weapon, a hypercharged electromagnetic pulse, EMP, designed to incapacitate the Xolarn's advanced tech. If they could get close enough to a Xolarn warship, the pulse would disable its shields, rendering it vulnerable to human weapons. "Admiral, we're ready," said Lieutenant Sarah Mendez, the head of their newly formed elite strike team. "We've developed a prototype EMP device that we're confident will work. It's our best shot at taking out a flagship." Jensen nodded grimly. The EMP could be their key to breaking the Xolarn's technological superiority, but it was a risky move. The human fleet wasn't strong enough to engage in an all-out battle. They had to rely on speed, surprise, and precision. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," Jensen said. "We need to hit them hard and fast, before they have a chance to strike again." Meanwhile, the Xolarn commanders watched from their flagship, Reaver's Maw, as the human fleet gathered its forces. They didn't seem concerned. To them, the idea of a ragtag, shattered human force launching a counterattack was laughable. They had already decimated half of Earth's military. Surely the humans would scatter again. They had no concept of the growing resistance on Earth, how the loss had forged a new determination in humanity, one that would soon come to bite them back. "We've destroyed their fleet," the Xolarn admiral said to his subordinates. "These humans are insignificant. They will bow to our might or perish." He dismissed the human threat with a casual wave of his hand. "Let them rebuild. Let them prepare. When we strike again, there will be nothing left." The Xolarn fleet continued to position itself for the final, crushing blow. But their overconfidence was their fatal flaw. They failed to notice the human ships slipping out of the shadows, their advanced stealth systems making them nearly invisible to the Xolarn sensors. The EMP devices had been rigged on a small, fast reconnaissance vessel, Eclipse, which had been retrofitted for the mission. It wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, but it was the most agile. And that was exactly what they needed. As the human strike force neared the Xolarn fleet, Jensen gathered her crew in the command room for one final briefing. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Xolarn's defensive perimeter, launch the EMP, and cripple their flagship. The rest of the fleet would provide cover, drawing attention away from the Eclipse for as long as possible. "Remember, this is a hit and run. We get in, we do the damage, and we get out. No heroics," Jensen said, her voice low and serious. She looked each of her officers in the eye. "This is our moment. It's time to show the Xolarn they were wrong to think we're weak." The crew nodded, determination set in their faces. The Xolarn might have been arrogant, but the humans had something they lacked: a unity and a will to fight that could never be easily crushed. The battle began with a silence that was almost eerie. The human fleet moved into position, their ships weaving through asteroids and debris, hidden in the shadows of distant moons. The Xol'arn were too busy with their own calculations, too sure of their victory, to see the humans closing in. And then the first shots rang out. Human fighters, like angry hornets, dove toward the Xol'arn vessels, firing with precision. It was enough to draw the attention of the Xol'arn. But it was the Eclipse that made its move. Like a ghost, it slipped past the Xol'arn defenses, its EMP charge ready to strike. As it neared the flagship Reaver's Maw, time seemed to slow. The EMP pulse detonated, sending a shockwave through the Xol'arn vessel. A moment later, the flagship's shields flickered, then collapsed entirely. The Xol'arn fleet fell into disarray as their once mighty command ship lost power, its systems going dark. Admiral Jensen watched from the Excalibur as the Xol'arn flagship struggled to respond. For the first time, the human fleet held the upper hand. The Xol'arn flagship Reaver's Maw trembled as the EMP pulse wreaked havoc on its systems. It was a moment that no one on the bridge of the Excalibur would ever forget. Humanity had struck the first decisive blow. The sudden vulnerability of the Xol'arn fleet sent shockwaves through their ranks, and the human fleet seized the opportunity with everything they had. The world's strongest military force had been brought to its knees, but it was the sheer will of humanity that would turn the tide. On the Excalibur, Admiral Jensen stood tall, her voice cutting through the chaos that followed the EMP strike. "All ships, focus fire on the Reaver's Maw," she commanded, her tone firm and resolute. "We've crippled their flagship. Now we finish what we started." The human fleet, though outnumbered and damaged, surged forward with newfound confidence. The small but nimble ships that had once been seen as weak now moved with deadly precision, ducking and weaving through enemy fire. They were fast, unpredictable, and ready to show the Xol'arn that Earth's fighting spirit couldn't be easily broken. From the cockpit of the Excalibur, Drake glanced at the tactical screen, his fingers flying across the control panel as he issued orders to their scattered fleet. "Target their engines. We need to slow them down before they regroup." But the Xol'arn, despite their initial disarray, weren't easily defeated. Their advanced ships, though vulnerable, still packed formidable firepower, and their commanders were quick to adapt. Within moments, the remaining Xol'arn warships began to form a defensive perimeter around the crippled Reaver's Maw, putting up a fierce resistance. The balance of the battle shifted again as the human ships, though still strong in spirit, were forced to contend with the full might of the Xol'arn war machines. "We're not out of the woods yet," Drake muttered as another barrage from a Xol'arn destroyer rocked the Excalibur. "They're regrouping. They'll adapt to our tactics if we don't change things up." Jensen's eyes narrowed as she took in the situation. The Xol'arn fleet was powerful, but they lacked the one thing humanity possessed: the ability to think outside the box, to surprise. "Get me the fleet's captains," she said, her voice sharp. "It's time we use everything we have." Across the battlefield, the human ships communicated in a series of rapid-fire commands, coordinating their movements in ways that the Xol'arn had not anticipated. The Excalibur's crew, once on the defensive, began to set traps and use the debris field to their advantage. The Xol'arn, with their superior firepower and overwhelming numbers, had expected to crush humanity in a single blow. But the human fleet was proving that even the smallest of victories could have a ripple effect. As the human ships darted between asteroids and debris, they laid traps of their own, hacking the Xol'arn's communications to create confusion among their ranks. Fake signals were sent, suggesting weaknesses in their defenses or surprise attacks that never came. The Xol'arn commanders, though experienced, began to second-guess themselves as the battle raged on. "Captain, their flagship's defenses are faltering," reported Lieutenant Mendez from the weapons station. "We've got a window. We need to hit them now." "Ready all weapons," Jensen ordered. "All ships, focus fire on the Reaver's Maw." This is our moment. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Waves of plasma fire and ion blasts rained down on the Solarn flagship, overwhelming its already weakened shields. The Reaver's maw began to break apart under the onslaught, its once imposing structure now riddled with explosions. As the flagship staggered, the remaining Solarn warships attempted to break off and protect their command ship, but it was too late. The human fleet had already pressed the advantage. With one final, decisive shot from the Excalibur's main cannons, the Reaver's maw exploded in a blinding burst of light, its shattered remains drifting in space. The remaining Solarn forces, now leaderless and disoriented, found themselves on the back foot. "That's it," Drake said, his voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "We did it." But Jensen's face remained grim. "Not yet," she replied, her gaze fixed on the carnage unfolding before them. "This is just the beginning. The Solarn won't surrender that easily." Even as the Solarn flagship disintegrated into the void, the remaining ships of the alien fleet continued to fight. The humans had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. The Solarn might have lost their flagship, but they still controlled the skies. They would regroup, they would adapt, and they would come back stronger. Jensen knew that the next phase of the war would be even more brutal. The Solarn, though wounded, were not finished. But this victory, the first major win for humanity, had proven something essential. Humanity had the strength to rise from defeat and fight on, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. As the human fleet regrouped, preparing for the inevitable counterattack, Admiral Jensen stood tall, her resolve unwavering. She knew the Solarn were formidable, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the heart of humanity. And that, she knew, would be their undoing. In the aftermath of their stunning victory, the human fleet regrouped, hovering just outside the wreckage of the Reaver's maw. The immediate danger had passed, but Admiral Jensen knew this moment of triumph was fragile. The Solarn, while stunned by the loss of their flagship, were far from defeated. The destruction of their command ship had caused chaos in their ranks, but the aliens were methodical, and they would soon reorganize and come back stronger than before. "Status report," Jensen demanded, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. "Shields are holding," reported Lieutenant Mendez, her fingers flying over her console. "We've sustained heavy damage, but we can continue fighting. The rest of the fleet is scattered but still operational." Jensen nodded, but her mind was racing. The Solarn would have felt the loss of their flagship deeply, but they had lost far more than that. Their arrogance, the very thing that had led them to underestimate humanity, would now be their downfall. They had exposed themselves, and the human fleet had exploited that weakness. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from won. "Get me the fleet commanders," Jensen ordered. She needed to consolidate their forces and prepare for whatever the Solarn were planning next. The longer they lingered, the greater the chances the aliens would launch a counteroffensive. On the Reaver's maw, now a smoldering wreck floating in the void, the Solarn were scrambling to recover. Their once unshakable confidence had been shattered by the humans' unexpected maneuver. What had been a clear path to conquest had now turned into a brutal struggle for survival. The loss of their flagship was a devastating blow, but the Solarn were nothing if not resilient. Their leaders convened in emergency sessions, their cold, calculating minds already formulating their next move. "Admiral, we've sustained significant losses, but we are far from defeated," one of the high-ranking commanders in the Solarn fleet reported. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with unspoken fury. "The humans may have struck at our flagship, but they haven't broken our resolve." Another Solarn leader, a towering figure in a dark cloak, nodded. "We underestimated them. This will not happen again. The humans are clever, but they are still weak. We have the advantage in numbers, in firepower. We will crush them before they have a chance to recover." Their determination was evident, But there was something else in the air now. An urgency, a fear that hadn't been there before. The Sol-Arn had always thought themselves invincible, but the human strike had created a crack in that illusion. Their fleet, though vast and technologically superior, was now hunting for weaknesses in their own strategy. The Sol-Arn admiral turned toward the tactical board, his eyes narrowing at the projections. "Prepare for reinforcements," he said. "We'll hit them hard and fast before they can regroup. We'll finish what we started, and we'll make them regret ever thinking they could defy us." Back on Earth, Jensen and her fleet commanders were making plans of their own. They had to move quickly. Their victory, while significant, was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. The Sol-Arn would come for them again, but this time, they would be ready. "We've shown them we can hurt them," Jensen said to her commanders, her eyes burning with the same intensity that had sparked the earlier attack. "But they won't stop. They'll come back with everything they have. It's time we start thinking bigger. We need to fight smarter, not just harder." Commander Drake stepped forward, his voice thoughtful. "We've learned how to deal with their advanced technology, but we can't keep fighting like this. We'll need to hit their supply lines, destroy their infrastructure, take out their support ships. If we cripple their resources, they won't have the means to fight us." Jensen nodded in agreement. "That's our next move. We hit them where it hurts. We strike their supply lines, their refueling stations. We disrupt their war machine from within. But we also need to stay one step ahead. We can't afford to let them get comfortable." The strategy was risky, but it was their best chance at gaining an upper hand in the war. Humanity couldn't fight the Sol-Arn head-on forever. They had to be smart. Guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and swift, calculated strikes. As the human fleet prepared for their next move, tension hung heavy in the air. The calm after their victory was short-lived, but it was the perfect opportunity to prepare. The battle had shifted in humanity's favor, but the war was far from over. The Sol-Arn would regroup, and when they did, they would bring their full might to bear. But Jensen, and every officer under her command, knew one thing. The Sol-Arn had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. Now, humanity had a chance to prove that they would not be crushed so easily. The storm was coming, and both sides knew that it would be a fight to the death. The days after the destruction of the Reaver's Maw were tense, filled with the hum of preparation and the sound of hurried commands echoing through the human fleet. Admiral Jensen had made it clear. There was no time to rest. The victory had been significant, but it was only a step. Now, it was time to turn the momentum in their favor. The human fleet, though battered, had been strengthened by the unity of purpose that had emerged in the wake of their victory. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked tirelessly around the clock, improving their ships, refining their tactics, and, most importantly, preparing for the inevitable Sol-Arn counterattack. "Admiral," Lieutenant Mendez said, walking briskly toward Jensen's command station, "we've decrypted Sol-Arn communications. They're regrouping. It won't be long before they launch a full-scale counterattack." But she hesitated, tapping her console. "We found something interesting. They're mobilizing a large fleet to strike Earth itself." Jensen's eyes widened as she processed the news. The Sol-Arn weren't just planning to retaliate. They were preparing for a decisive, all-out assault on Earth. If they succeeded in this, all of humanity's victories would be rendered meaningless. "We need to strike first," Jensen said, her voice a sharp command. "We can't wait for them to reach Earth. We're going to hit them where it hurts most, right at their core." The plan was set in motion immediately. Their fleet, still wounded but more united than ever, would launch a bold strike directly into the heart of the Sol-Arn's war machine, their staging base on the far side of the system, hidden within the shadow of a distant moon. It was a risk, but it was the only chance they had to prevent Earth from falling. The Excalibur and its fleet moved silently through space, utilizing every stealth tactic they had at their disposal. The ships were heavily modified, their hulls stripped of unnecessary weight to increase speed and agility. Their trajectory would take them past the Solarn's outer defenses, just barely within range of their sensor networks. The human fleet had learned how to move like shadows, quick, silent, and nearly impossible to detect until it was too late. "Status check," Jensen said, her eyes scanning the ship's operations screen. The countdown to the strike was in motion. They had only one chance to pull it off. "Shields are at full capacity, all engines running at optimal levels," Mendes replied. "We're on course for the Solarn base. The other ships are holding formation. No signs of detection yet." Jensen nodded, her expression tight with focus. The operation was going according to plan, but she knew better than to assume victory. The Solarn were cunning. They might be underestimating humanity now, but that wouldn't last. Soon enough, they would realize the danger humanity posed. "Keep it tight," Jensen ordered. "If we give them any opening, they'll tear us apart. Our mission is simple: hit their base hard, disable their production lines, and get out before they can react. We strike fast, then we disappear." The human fleet closed in on the Solarn base, a sprawling facility built on the dark side of the moon. The complex, massive and cold, was the heart of the Solarn war effort. It was here that their ships were refueled, repaired, and rearmed, a vital hub for the continuing war machine. If they could cripple this base, it would slow the Solarn long enough for humanity to rally its forces and prepare for a more decisive confrontation. But as the human ships approached, a faint tremor of doubt passed through Jensen's mind. The Solarn were never easy to fool. Their ability to anticipate human tactics had been proven time and again. Would they have anticipated a strike on their base? Was this trap set for them, rather than the other way around? The thoughts were fleeting, though. There was no time for hesitation. The operation was already in motion. The first wave of human ships veered off, their small, agile vessels racing toward the facility, launching guided EMP missiles designed to disable the Solarn's defense systems. A second wave, made up of heavier ships, prepared to take advantage of any weakness. Then, as expected, the Solarn sprung into action. The alarms on the Excalibur blared as a hail of enemy fire erupted from the darkened base. The Solarn had been prepared for this. The human fleet had walked right into a trap. "Shields up," shouted Commander Drake as the Excalibur rocked under the impact. The shields flared bright against the incoming fire, but the barrage was relentless. The Solarn had anticipated the strike, and now they were launching their counteroffensive. Jensen's jaw tightened as the tactical readouts flickered. "Evasive maneuvers," she barked. "We can't let them lock onto us. Keep moving, keep them guessing, and prepare to hit back, now." The human fleet quickly retaliated, launching wave after wave of plasma blasts, ion torpedoes, and laser fire. It was chaos, a storm of violence and destruction as both fleets clashed. But amid the chaos, the human fleet's adaptability shone through. Smaller, more nimble ships darted in and out, attacking the Solarn base's vulnerable points, while larger ships coordinated a devastating barrage at the enemy's control centers. As the battle raged on, Jensen's strategy was beginning to bear fruit. The Solarn base was starting to show signs of damage. Explosions tore through its outer hull, and the defensive turrets began to fall silent. The humans had successfully disrupted their operations, but the Solarn were not done yet. They were regrouping for one final, all-out counterstrike. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The battle raged on around the human fleet, each ship maneuvering with precision as they fought tooth and nail against the Solarn's superior numbers and firepower. The once gleaming Solarn base was now a decimated battlefield, its once imposing defenses crumbling under the onslaught of humanity's most daring assault. Despite the initial success, the situation had quickly escalated into a brutal conflict that threatened to overwhelm the human forces. Admiral Jensen stood at the helm of the Excalibur, her mind running through 1,000 calculations as explosions rocked the ship. The Solarn had sprung their trap, but the humans were not giving up. Their small, Agile ships darted in and out of the enemy fire, striking at weak points and retreating before the Solarn could retaliate. The larger ships were slowly but surely pushing forward, pounding the enemy defenses with relentless firepower. "Admiral, we've taken down the main defense grid, but they got reinforcements coming in fast," Lieutenant Mendez reported, her voice tight with urgency. "We don't have much time before their reinforcements overwhelm us." Jensen's jaw tightened. She knew this was the moment. The Solarn had underestimated humanity before, and now it was time to capitalize on their overconfidence. They had caused significant damage to the Solarn base, but now they had to break the heart of the war effort. Something far more difficult. "We're not going to win this by holding back," Jensen said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Prepare the Excalibur and the fleet for a final strike. We're going to target the central reactor of the base. If we can destroy it, we cripple their entire operation." The crew hesitated for only a moment, their faces grim. They knew the stakes. A direct strike on the reactor would be risky. The explosion would likely take out any ships in the vicinity, including the Excalibur. But there was no choice. If they allowed the Solarn to regroup, their opportunity would slip away. Drake, standing next to Jensen, looked at her with determination. "We're all in, Admiral. No turning back." Jensen nodded. She had led them this far, and now she would lead them to the end. Meanwhile, on the Solarn flagship Dreadbringer, the Solarn commanders were desperately trying to regain control of the situation. The loss of their base had shaken them, but the situation was far from hopeless. The reinforcements they had called for were arriving, and their flagship was still fully operational, though damaged. "Admiral, the humans are pushing toward the reactor," one of the Solarn tactical officers reported. "They're attempting a direct strike." The Solarn admiral stood in front of the strategic hologram, watching as the human fleet closed in. "We can't allow them to succeed. If they destroy the reactor, it's over for us. Mobilize all remaining forces. We will crush them before they have a chance to reach their target." The Solarn fleet regrouped quickly, their massive warships forming a defensive perimeter around the reactor. But Jensen knew that their formation would have a flaw. The Solarn's arrogance had blinded them to one critical truth. Human ingenuity was unpredictable. Initiating final approach, Mendez said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We've got one shot at this. If we don't hit that reactor dead on, we're done." Jensen's grip on the command chair tightened. She had no illusions about the odds they faced. Focus everything on the reactor. Take out their fighters. Take out their ships. But above all else, make sure we hit that reactor. The human fleet surged forward, charging toward the core of the Solarn base. The remaining Solarn ships threw everything they had at them. But the human vessels were agile, unpredictable, darting between incoming fire and retaliating with pinpoint accuracy. The Solarn fleet was disoriented by the sudden, relentless attack, but their reinforcements were still too powerful, and the final push was not without sacrifice. The Excalibur and the other human ships closed in on the reactor's location, the final target now in their sights. The air was thick with tension, the roar of energy blasts, and the crackle of weapons fire filling the space around them. "Admiral, we're almost there," Drake said, his voice grim. "The Solarn are throwing everything at us. The shields are holding, but we're taking hits." Jensen gave a short nod. "Don't stop now. We're finishing this." With a final, blinding burst of energy, the human fleet's collective firepower erupted. The Excalibur and its allies unleashed everything in their arsenal, targeting the vulnerable core of the reactor. The Solarn flagship Dreadbringer tried to intervene, but the human ships were too fast, too focused. The first strike hit the reactor, followed by another, and then another. The energy cascaded through the Solarn base, and in an instant, the facility erupted into a violent explosion. A massive shockwave reverberated through space, sending ripples of destruction across the battlefield. The blast engulfed the base, obliterating everything in its path. The Solarn fleet, already struggling, was thrown into chaos. As the shockwave dissipated and the smoke cleared, the human fleet's damage was apparent. Several ships were crippled, and many had sustained heavy losses, but the Solarn base was no more. The heart of the enemy's war effort had been destroyed in a single devastating blow. Jensen watched the destruction unfold before her, the aftermath of their bold gambit. It had been a gamble, a risky, near-suicidal move, but it had paid off. The Solarn had been dealt a crippling blow, and now humanity had the upper hand. "We did it," Drake said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's over." Jensen stood silently for a moment, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. They had won, but the war was far from finished. The Solarn would not take this defeat lightly, but humanity had shown them something undeniable. The will to fight could never be broken. "Not yet," Jensen said, her voice calm but firm. "This war is far from over. But today, we proved something. Today, we showed the universe that humanity cannot be defeated." And in the distance, beyond the wreckage of the Solarn base, the stars seemed a little brighter, a little more hopeful. The war was not over, but the human spirit had never burned brighter.